Hello and welcome to all of you to this segment of Introduction to Autonomous Systems. You may recall that in the last session that we had, we introduced the first keyword, that is systems, and we gave some basic ideas about what a system is, how it is defined. In today's session, we will take this concept further and we will see it from a perspective of science, or what is commonly called science of systems. So, let us begin today's lecture. Before we do that, let me just give you some background about how system design has evolved over last 60, 70 odd years. So, if you see, since 1950s, that is at the end of the World War II, large and complex systems were visualized as important element of any modern technological security system. And then people started finding that they were no longer limited to either a single scientific discipline or even scientific or engineering disciplines alone. So, that was the issue. Now, that brought in important scientific developments such as multidisciplinary design strategies, and more importantly, people started looking at humanities and other non-engineering disciplines which became essential for creating successful systems. And that is how the concept of, or the discipline of, system science evolved. The idea was that we need to study this particular aspect of systems so that we can synthesize human and environment centric systems. Now, once people realized this, that ultimately science as a discipline has been responsible for all our knowledge and of course has been classified into well understood disciplines such as physics, biology, economics, and you name it, the host of disciplines are there. The problem came when the same philosophy was extended to the context of systems. And there people started finding that there were a lot of individual scientific disciplines which were already well established were playing a role. But then there was something else which was needed to explain the overall behavior of the system, which was not possible through any one of the basic discipline. And that is where the issue became critical and people started studying the science of systems. So, if you look at this whole idea, the field of system science has evolved and has given rise to three generic concepts. First one being cybernetics, then systems theory and systemology. Let us look at each of these as to how they have evolved and what they represent in the context of science of systems. So, let us first take the word cybernetics or the discipline of cybernetics. Cybernetics was a word was first coined in 1947 by Robert Wiener and comes from Greek word meaning steersman. So, there was a kind of a word used in Greece which meant steersman, and that is how this word was kind of used to come up with the term cybernetics. Of course, in its very narrow interpretation, it is similar to what many of us would know as servo theory in engineering. But of course, if we expand its canvas, what it essentially means is it has to do with self-regulation, and most of the natural science is part of it. And that is where it is of immense value to science of systems. Now, another important point which came up when this particular discipline was being evolved was that all goal seeking behavior, and please note, all of us, humans, animals, systems that we create, ultimately there is a goal or an objective that we are seeking. So, everything is goal oriented, and it was found that all such goal seeking behavior is controlled by corrective information obtained through feedback, and that concept is what is central to cybernetics. So, essentially the cybernetics is built upon the basic theory of feedback control. In fact, a classic example of this in biological system is homeostasis, that is finding an equilibrium of a body, that it comes back to equilibrium when disturbed, and that is the whole idea of control through feedback mechanisms. So, if we look at what exactly cybernetics has brought in to this science of systems, an important element which has come in is distinction between the information flow and the power, which means it has been recognized that flow of information is a distinct entity and needs to be recognized. And it also established, which was at till that time not very clearly stated, that if you look at any type of control mechanism, they are all fundamentally identical, which means no matter which discipline, which engineering, non-engineering, humanities discipline, if you are talking about a control mechanism which is essentially correction through feedback, they are all fundamentally identical. And that also brought in another dimension, that all such basic principles of feedback control are subject to mathematical treatment, and that is how the cybernetics brought in not only the basic theory of feedback control, but also the mathematics which was created to help understand the physics and generate useful results. Of course, before the cybernetics, around 1940s, another concept was also being considered called general systems theory, which said that control and self-regulation are one aspect of systems, but there are certain basic principles which are common to all systems, and they go well beyond these two basic entities of control and self-regulation, which was the basic focus of cybernetics. In this context, Ludwig used the phrase general system theory around 1950 to describe such an effort. So, if we look at what exactly is this general systems theory, it primarily is concerned with developing a systematic framework for describing the relationships that exist between natural and the man-made worlds. So, this is where the general systems theory came into the picture, to say that how do these two things interact, what are the relations, can we quantify them, can we take that in a manner that we can create systems which will interact with the natural world. And now you see the thought behind this idea of general systems theory, that if you are going to create systems which have to operate in natural world, then naturally the systems have to understand the relationship that they should maintain with the natural world. For example, if you create a machine which is being operated by humans, the very early ideas of the general systems theory came in manufacturing sector in the form of man-machine systems. There is a huge amount of research which is available and information is available. If you are interested, you can look at it. But if you want to really understand this, the whole idea is that there is a connection between natural and the man-made things, and you need to be able to identify the relationship and maintain them as they should be. And the primary need for such a theory has come from the issues coming through communication. See, the problem always has been, how do you communicate between dissimilar disciplines or scientific domains? For example, how does physics talk to chemistry, nuclear science, economics, sociology? It is all complicated, and that brought in the idea of a structured hierarchy of levels of increasing complexity for individual systems which were studied in different fields. So, you create a hierarchy, and using that now you start looking at how to communicate between natural world and the man-made world. And it was found that the moment you create this hierarchy, it leads to a systematic approach for the design of systems that serve different purposes, and also the systems that have the ability to function autonomously. And now you will realize that this is something which is central to our course, because we are talking about autonomous systems. So, we are looking at now this systematic approach to the design of systems, which will help us to create products which can function autonomously. So, I just want to give you in a nutshell what these hierarchical levels are and how they kind of seamlessly merge with each other to create systems which then function efficiently in both man-made and the natural world. So, let us start with the hierarchical levels 1 to 3. There are actually 9 levels, we will look at all the 9. So, let us first take levels 1 to 3. The lowest is the static level, and to understand what this static level means, we say that anything that we create that describes an arrangement, layouts, markings, legends, for example, detailed drawings of a building, patterns of atoms, maps that we create, flow charts, they are all static objects that are at the lowest level of our systems. Please note, they are also systems, because they contain important information about a particular object or an idea or a concept. Then we take it to the next level, which we call simple dynamic systems. And those simple dynamic systems also bring in the concept of repetitive motion related to actions. For example, clocks are ideal example of simple dynamic systems, pulleys, gear trains, motors, they all have the idea of repetitive motion, and the description of such motion is extremely simple. We take the next level, that is where the cybernetic system has come. So, the cybernetic system which were evolved in around 1947, they are essentially at the level 3 of our hierarchy, and that involves synthesis of control system related hardware, software, and classic examples that we see in many applications in our day-to-day life are thermostats that are used in fridge, air conditioners, ovens, speed governors which are controlling the RPM of various motors, generators, etc. So, those are very, very simple cybernetic systems which use the principle of feedback, corrective action and ultimately achieve homeostasis. We will take now levels 4 to 6. The next level, the fourth level is of a cell, a very, very basic building block of biological systems, and that includes systems that exhibit material exchange. So, these are the features that we are looking at in a cell: self maintenance, because we already have through cybernetics the idea of homeostasis, that we can correct ourselves through feedback. Now, it is taken to the next level with material exchange, micro and nanoscale modeling, and examples are amoeba, they are single cell structures, bacterium, algae, fungus. Those are all single cell structures which have self maintenance, which can exchange material between each other, like for example, they can break up and create more cells. So, this is at the level 4. At level 5 we have plant like systems. Now, that bring in concept of genetic structure. See, amoeba, bacterium, algae, they do not have any genetic structure, they just have a single cell and material exchange requirements. But plants bring in genetic structure and differentiated parts, which means now the same system has different types of parts. For example, if you look at a particular tree, it will have stem or trunk, it will have branches, it will have leaves, it will have flowers, it will have fruits. They are all different parts, but they are still part of the same system and ultimately are working together in a coordinated manner to ultimately make sure that that system is stable, survives and also evolves in different contexts. So, all flora, vegetation, mangroves, rainforests, they are all classic examples of the 5th level of our system description. At the 6th level, then we talk about the animal world, that brings into system design acts of mobility. If you look at all these until this point, there is no let us say possibility of mobility of these systems. But now you have, along with everything else, acts of mobility, then self awareness, reproduction, growth that we see in fauna, avians, insects, amphibians. So, all those now are at the 6th level of our hierarchy. You can see where all these are now moving towards, and that is the human. So, human actually is at the level 7 of this hierarchical system. Even though sometime you may have heard people say that we are kind of at the top of the pyramid, in some sense we are above all the other natural world systems and all associated features such as concept of thought, I mean all the level features of level 6, and then we bring in additional ideas of concept of thought, most powerful and unique feature of the natural world. And that is what differentiates humans from other natural systems, that we have the concept of thought. And of course, then this goes to 2 further levels. At level 8, we bring in the collective systems like multi-agent scenarios in the form of society. So, humans also are part of the societal systems that involve issues related to roles, value system, art, emotions, politics, media. So, human by itself is a system at level 7, but society is a system at level 8. And of course, they say that the highest level of in this hierarchy comes from transcendental systems, which involve different aspects of intangibles. Now, at this level there are no tangibles, they are all esoteric ideas, concepts like new knowledge creation, philosophy, religion, spirituality, they all are at level 9. Now, as you can see with this description, if we are creating systems which have to function in an autonomous manner in natural world, then natural world contains all this, and the systems that you want to create which will work autonomously, they have to understand all this. For example, if you are creating a machine which has to work with humans, it has to understand emotions, politics, media. So, you see there are so many kind of issues which keep coming up globally, that for example, you create a particular system and say okay, it is having lot of emissions, and there is a hue and cry all over saying that no, environment friendly things should be there, and immediately the whole thing is cancelled. Now, one thing which we need to note is that all of these are recursive in nature, that at level 7 all that is possible at levels 1 to 6 are implicitly included. So, which means if you are creating a system at level 7, which means you have to actually do all of those which are there from 1 to 6, and that shows that these are kind of systems with increasing complexity. And just to give you a flavor, if you are creating a system which is kind of a humanoid as an autonomous system, now you realize that what that humanoid will involve in terms of complexity, that would be at level 7, or you may even peg it at level 8 if they are talking about as a kind of a collective system. Like, just to give you an example, like swarms of drones. Suppose let us say drones were all autonomous systems having its own information, they would be at level 7, but the swarm would be at level 8. And you will realize now the complexity involved in creating such systems, which we are now talking about as part of this course in this autonomous systems, that how do we now come up with a design philosophy, an architecture which will create systems preferably at level 8, but definitely at level 7. And we also note that concepts of and tools of science and engineering are essential, but there are going to be many other intangibles which are going to be required to capture this essence of a system which is going to be either at level 7 or at level 8. And this has also brought in another idea, what we call systemology. It is commonly employed to describe all aspects of science of systems and the processes for their formation. So, you put everything together, not only the basic science, but if you put the engineering of the such systems in the form of a process, then together it is called systemology. And it is essentially an interdisciplinary viewpoint that brings together traditional scientific disciplines such as physics, biology, but also humanities such as operations research and management. They all have to come together to create a system which can function at level 7 or at level 8. And as I just now mentioned, and I am going to kind of reiterate, this is the only way which I call systems thinking, which will help us to synthesize autonomous systems that we are looking at, which have to operate in natural world, and they will require all this. And it is possible that they may also at some point go to the level 9, which means they also may bring in ideas of philosophy, some amount of other ideas such as your ability to work with concepts which are not very easily understood. To conclude, levels of general systems theory and unification of different practices of science, humanities and management are essential tools for designing systems that can function autonomously. With that, we will conclude this particular segment today, and we will take the next segment, in which we will take the next keyword, the whole idea of the autonomous operation. So, bye and see you in the next segment. Thank you.